On this week's MetPy Monday, learn how to use the argparse library to add command line arguments to your Python scripts. Welcome to another MetPy Monday. Hello, I'm John Lehman, a software engineer at Unidata. On this week's MetPy Monday, we're going to continue talking about making Python scripts, but this week we're going to add command line arguments. So if you've used other command line tools, which things like ls or cd or pwd, cp, mv, all those Linux commands you're used to using are command line tools, you probably have seen command line arguments where you can specify options that you want those commands to execute, such as last week when we used ls and then -l for a long listing to see more details about our files so we could change the execute permission on our script. So we're going to look at how to add those kinds of arguments to your scripts so you don't have to go in and change a variable. Say you want to plot a different variable or something like that. Instead of going into your Python script, changing it, and then rerunning, instead you can pass it as a command line argument, not have to go in and change things in your script. Makes it a lot nicer workflow. And while you can do this manually by parsing out different arguments given to the system, there is a library, argparse, part of the standard library that is in Python and makes this very easy, as well as does some nice things like automatically generates help for you. So go ahead and fire up your text editor and let's get started. Okay, so this is where we left off last week. And I'm going to go ahead and come over here to my scripting folder, right-click, and I want to make a new file. Remember, I'm using the Atom text editor. If you're using a different editor, this will be slightly different, but that's just fine. I'm going to call this one secondscript.py, very creative name. And we could copy and paste from first script, but let's go ahead and type it out because we're going to change some things, and it's always good to do that typing when you're trying to learn and internalize what's going on. That's also one reason that these scripts aren't linked anywhere, so you can follow along and type them with me. So the first thing we need is our #bang user bin env python. Now we're going to do our imports. Last week we just imported time. This week we're going to import argparse and import time. You'll notice I'm getting these suggestions popping up. This is one of the really nice things about using these kind of editors that have some more advanced capabilities. They can save you some typing and keep you from having to go look at the docs as much with this auto-completion. Okay, so last week our script counted down from 10 and then said blast off, and it had some little preamble text. Well, I want to make every part of that user configurable. So I want you to be able to set the preamble text to whatever you'd like. I want you to be able to set the timer to whatever you'd like. So maybe 3 seconds instead of 10, or 3600 if you need to wait an hour for something. And then we'll set the event text. So instead of saying blast off, you can make it say whatever you want. Now, I like having command line tools that work in a sane way with all the defaults. And then you can specify options. So there are ways to make required command line arguments. But this could be, you're going to set it for 3600 seconds, and then the event timer says take the brownies out of the oven or something like that. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is make a parser object. I'm going to say parser equals argparse dot argument parser. And then I'm going to provide a description. And for the description, this is what does this tool do? If somebody just invokes it from the command line and looks at the help, what is the description going to be? And I'm going to say make a countdown timer to an event. Perfect. Now we need to add arguments to our parser object. So parser dot add argument. You see, this is the first thing that popped up with this helpful code completion. So I just have to press return. It saves me the typos. We need to provide what we want the user to invoke for this argument. Normally, if it's a single letter, it's a dash in the letter or a dash dash and a name. I'm going to go ahead and use long names to make it a little bit clearer here. So dash dash event. This is going to be the name of the event. Let's give it a default. And we'll stick with what we had last week, which was blast off. And then it's always good to give a help message. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap this so it looks a little bit nicer. And for our help message, let's say event message at end of timer. Something that will help somebody that's never used this utility before figure out what that does. All right, let's add another one, parser.addArgument. Let's do one for how long we want to count down. So you could call this start, or you could call it duration, you could call it several things. I think I'm going to call it start. It's a little bit shorter to type than duration and still clear. So let's give it a default of 10. And right now, you could give any type of argument that you wanted to this. So you could set start to A, and you would get an error because that's not going to make sense. So we want to restrict the type that you can give this command line argument. We do that by saying type equals int. So you could specify that the user can only give floats or integers. We want to make sure that we behave sanely for these inputs. And then again, always best practice to go ahead and give ourselves a help message. So help is going to be duration of the timer in seconds. Okay. And we'll add one more. So parser.addArgument. This one is going to be for the text that appears before the timer starts. So I'm going to call that the preamble, which may be familiar to those of you that use LaTeX or something like that. And for the preamble, I am going to say the default is none. We don't want a preamble. And the help is going to be countdown message. Okay, so that all looks good. Now we're ready to say, okay, we need to parse these arguments. Let's say args equals parser dot parse args. So that's going to take everything that the command line had, run it through this parser, and store it in args. So now we're ready to write the main bit of our program here. So first, we're going to print the preamble. I'm going to say if args.preamble. This is how we access some of these things that we passed out. So args.event, args.start, and args.preamble are how we access those three things that could be passed through the command line. So if args.preamble, if that is what we call a truthy value, our default is none, so this will not evaluate to true unless somebody passes a preamble. Then we want to print args.preamble. So that's only going to print it if there's something there. Then our loop, so for I in range, and we need to start at the starting value that our user gave us. So that's args.start. We're going to go to 0, but not including, and count by -1. That's the same as last week. Then we're going to print. And I'm going to use a little bit more generic message than launch in. So timer expires in some number of seconds. And we want to print I in there. Then we call time.sleep for 1 second. And after we are done with that loop, then we're going to print our event notification. So print args.event. event. So that should be our complete program ready to run. So let's try it out. Don't forget to save and then head over to the command line. All right, now we're at the command line. So I'm going to do an ls, and we see there it is. I'm going to go ahead and add execute permissions. So chmod plus x, second script. That way I can just use /second_script.py. Now by default, this starts at 10, counts down in increments of 1, just like we did last week. And you see we didn't get a preamble message since we didn't specify one. And then we have the blast off message. But let's look at some of the other cool things that the argparse library did for us. So I'm going to hit the up arrow to get that command back. Now I'm going to use -h. You notice we didn't specify -h as an argument, or --help, if that makes it a little bit clearer what's going to happen. Either of those will do the same thing. If we run that, you see we get this manual page automatically generated. So it has a usage statement. We have an event, a start, and a preamble. It has the help messages that we made down there, and our make a countdown timer to an event application description. That's why you want to use those and specify them with some useful comments, so you can help yourself or someone else remember how to use this. Okay, so let's try it out. So our second script.py, I'm going to set the preamble to be cookies are baking. I'm going to set the event to be cookies are done. And let's set the start to be 3 seconds, just so it's relatively quick. Cookies are baking, timer expires in 3, 2, 1, cookies are done. And you don't have to specify all those, of course. You could specify 1 or 2, and they can be in any order. That's one of the beauties of using these command line arguments. Now let's make one more change to show you how you could require a command line argument. Okay, so we're back at our script here, and let's say I wanted to require a preamble. You must tell me what this timer is for. So I'm going to take the default equals none out and replace it with required equals true. So we'll save our script, and let's go back over to the command line. Okay, now that we're back here, I'm going to run my script again, and with no arguments, remember it should work, or it would have worked with our previous incarnation here, but now it says the following arguments are required, preamble. And you notice in the help string that preamble is no longer in square brackets, indicating that it's optional. So if I specify a preamble of generic timer, not very useful, then the script works. That's how you can force someone to give you a command line argument for your script. Maybe it's an input file. They have to give you an input file for the script to work on. There's no sensible default. The other thing that it's always helpful to test and make sure that it's doing exactly what you think is our start. Remember, we specified that it should be an integer. So what happens if I pass a start of A? I know you might say, well, why would you ever do that? Users do interesting things, and you're a user in the future. So we see that we get an invalid int value A. So that is a useful error message instead of just your script bombing out somewhere in the middle and people not really being sure why. This message gives them the idea that, oh, this needs to be an integer. So I hope that you found the argparse library useful and that you can start using it in your scientific scripts. Next week, we'll wrap up our command line series by looking at a buoy data plotter that is based on the command line arguments that we've just seen today, and how to make something that is a useful scientific tool with it. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you on next week's MetPy Monday.